Hello there, it's Silver, and this time I'm doing something a little different. This is the Elder Scrolls Online. See, normally I stick to single-player games because that's where my experience lies. However, I do have something for this from back before I swore off multiplayer experiences. I played Final Fantasy XI for about 9 straight years, right from launch, so I do actually have some MMO knowledge. I decided, with as much as I like the Elder Scrolls series, it's about time that I take a look at this. With all the expansions and years of content that this game has gotten, there's no way I could see it all in time for a video, so I opted to enjoy the quest lines and travel around to give myself a good window into this game. One interesting thing about ESO that really appealed to me was that you can kind of play it as a single-player game. The leveling, questing, and world exploration can all be done comfortably solo, with only big group events and group dungeons being things that you need more players for. There's also a massive load of quests to do, which means you can go around the zones in a pretty open order with content scaling around you. My look at this game is ultimately going to be surface level, from the perspective of someone that loves RPGs and had a long tie to one MMO in particular. So after all that, I think it's time to get started. We'll start off where I usually like to, with audiovisual presentation. MMOs are always a bit behind the curve in terms of visuals. They have to be able to run on a large variety of systems, so that does generally avoid massively impressive visual spectacle and ultra high-res textures and all that stuff. That being said, the visual flair of an MMO comes from art direction and environment art. With ESO, they had a tough job. Tamriel is a complex place with many different cultures, and you can travel to just about anywhere on the continent. This means the visual variety on display here is quite something. You can go from the giant mushrooms and alien landscapes of Morrowind straight into the snow, ice, and wooden longhouses of Skyrim, all in a few minutes. It's impressive how each region reflects the cultures present within it. So features like way shrines, dungeons, ruins, and towns all have different appearances that match with where you are. As you explore a zone, many of which can be impressively large, by the way, you'll get a feel for what kinds of ruins you'll be exploring and what sorts of settlements you'll be coming across. Each province has a visual identity that goes over every aspect of it, and then usually has some room for smaller bits of other cultures, like say the Argonian presence in Morrowind. Also important to me in an MMO is making sure combat looks cool. We're going to be doing it a lot, so I want my skills to look snazzy. I chose the Arcanist as my class, which uses lots of triangular green eldritch magic, complete with tentacles sometimes. I'm happy with the way the combat looks, I think. It's got to be readable when lots of things are on screen because MMO, and I think it manages to look powerful and satisfying while still retaining that needed readability. There's also a huge variety of skill types and weapon attacks, so the combat scape definitely doesn't lack for variation. This also extends to making sure enemies have solid silhouettes, especially enemies that are particularly dangerous. They achieve this in a few ways. First is that all enemies have a red glow surrounding them, which easily highlights their shape. Even before aggroing them, you can see the glow and get a good look at what type of enemy they are. The other way is the health gauge. All enemies have one, of course, but they come in several shapes and sizes. The more ornate the health gauge is, the more of a threat that enemy is. So simply looking their way is enough to roughly gauge their strength. The music I was particularly impressed with, both in terms of variety and quality. It sounds like Elder Scrolls music, which ironically isn't exactly what I was expecting. I was thinking about some more generic fantasy fare to fit the MMO label, but no, the music in this wouldn't sound out of place in a mainline TES game. Just like the visual style, the music changes to fit each area you explore. So every province has exploration, town, dungeon, and big city music. It was always nice to have those tracks in the background when I was looking around a new zone. Sometimes they were even good enough to catch my attention for a few and elevate themselves above the background. There's also fittingly dark and epic music that plays for moments like being in the bowels of a creepy dungeon filled with undead, or facing off against an important story boss after hyping them up all zone. Overall, as much as I enjoyed the graphical variety present across the world, I think the music is my favorite aspect of the whole audio-visual thing. There's always seems to be a great track playing for the moment, and much of it has stuck with me as really good editing music. It's clear they understood the status of TES music and the rest of the series, and didn't want to let the player base down. So my verdict is that it tends to focus on variety and a wide experience, and these things are actually quite good in terms of finding a graphical and audio identity for the game. The sense of scale the game uses is interesting. Everything is big. Doors are big, ruins are big, everything feels large. This is Windhelm in Skyrim, much bigger than I remember. I think they wanted to do this to feed into that sense of fantasy adventure when everything feels big and ancient and you get this feeling that you're exploring an epic and lore-filled world. I think it does its job pretty well, even if it does kind of make you feel short. One thing I ended up really liking is how leveling works. It's a standard MMO thing at first, kill enemies and complete quests to gain experience, get enough, and level up. But once you level, you get a couple points, one stat and one skill. The stat points can be put into stamina, health, or magicka to increase those individually, but the skill point is where it gets interesting. You have a set of so-called skill lines. Each of these is like a category that contains various active and passive skills and sometimes an ultimate depending on the line. Your character will start with about 3 lines based on your class. These will be full of things to spend points on and expand your character. But you can also get more lines just from doing things. Wear several pieces of medium armor and you'll get the medium armor line. You'll get one based on what race you're playing. You can get others too, like a vampire one. Each line can also level up as you gain XP, which calls to mind the skill systems of the mainline TES games. New active and passive options will open up as you level the line, giving you more of what it does. Passive skills also have levels, and at certain thresholds you can spend more skill points in them to enhance their effects. Active skills have levels as well, but these are represented by Roman numerals and they increase by actually using them. They get stronger as they level, but at a certain level threshold, they can also be specialized. Each active has 2 separate skills that it could become. You pick the one that sounds best for your build, and it'll reset the level of that skill and change it to its new form. All this means there's pretty great build variety, with characters having lots of different possible places they could spec into, and a significant amount of leeway while leveling. I don't know, however, if all of this variety stays in the endgame. How much there are specific builds for each class to make sure you have before doing harder dungeons and things like that. I can only comment on the leveling experience. Crafting is another thing that MMOs tend to have a standard template for, and this game mostly follows that with some unique bits. Gathering is done just as you would think, from monsters and resource nodes, and there are various crafting stations in larger cities for each discipline. Blacksmithing and tailoring do have an interesting tidbit where items have a style. The style is named after the race that uses that style, so you may get a recipe for a Redguard sword or Dark Elf pauldrons. This adds some visual flair to the items that you make, and means that there are lots of possible armor appearances for your level. Other crafting disciplines like enchanting and alchemy I didn't get to try, but I can see they focus on identifying the effects of the materials and then combining them to make a specific end product. Then, as you level the craft, you'll be able to identify higher level mats and so on. Overall, the crafting in this game is one of those things that takes a very long time to get good at, and will slowly level as you get better stuff to make, creating a satisfying but slow-paced set of professions. Exploration was really important to me, as it's my favorite aspect of Elder Scrolls games, so I wanted to see how good it is here. First off, Tamriel is huge. There's a lot of places to go, and you get some basic fast travel areas across the continent to start off with, so you can kind of go anywhere. Zones are very large, often encompassing outdoor areas and dungeon bits. They feel like an in-between of classic MMO zones and single-player RPG areas. They often have several things you can find simply by exploring, and it makes them feel very content-rich. But you'll also run into areas that feel like the designated combat area outside of the designated questing zone and so forth. One thing that's used to reward exploration and encourage people to not just go from quest to quest are sky shards. Sky shards are big crystals that shoot up a bright column of light into the sky, and for every 3 of them you find and collect, you'll get 1 skill point. Due to the number of skill lines you can have, every extra point is really useful. While wandering around, you'll also find smaller settlements and hostile zones with lots of NPCs that have side quests for you. You'll run into them everywhere as you travel, so there's lots of opportunity to go off the main quest train and spend some time in an area solving people's problems. So, questing. It's what you'll be doing most of the time that isn't downtime. I was pretty surprised by the effort that goes into making the questing experience feel closer to a single-player game. There's a tremendous amount of voice acting in this game. That in itself helps out a lot. Every single major quest leading through the areas I came across was fully voice acted all the way through. Friendly NPCs have plenty to say about what you need to do, and many of them also have optional dialogue explaining things like the current zone and the factions in play. The big villains of the quest lines you'll come across also have voice acting, giving their role more gravitas, I suppose. It's easy to get lost in the quest lines and start treating them like single-player games due to all the voice acting, often using actors that Bethesda themselves have had in their games before. The side quests are surprisingly often voice acted as well. The quality of questing is a bit mixed. Much of the main quests are pretty well done, with varied objectives and locales that it'll send you through, and they don't tend to feel like standard MMO quests a lot of the time. I do like the variety in tasks you'll be given, from lighting torches to gathering drops from enemies to summoning Daedra to going through portals. You'll notice that the major quests in an area have lots of objectives for you to accomplish, and that they don't tend to repeat them within that zone. The side quests, though, can be a bit more mixed. Some of them genuinely do feel like mainline TES side quests, but many of them are a more standard MMO fare. This means that you'll be mostly impressed with the major stuff, but when you decide to stick around in an area and do some side content, you'll probably find yourself being a bit choosy of which ones you want to do before moving on. All said, though, I think they did a good job of making the questing experience feel different from most MMOs, and the quality of things to do is one thing I'll be remembering about my time with the game. Dungeon crawling is hugely important for the Elder Scrolls formula, of course, and this game has some advantages in that. For one, the large amount of cultural visual variety extends to the dungeons themselves, which have many different appearances depending on where you are. The other thing that helps is the sense of scale I mentioned earlier. The large scale makes dungeons feel ancient and important, these big ruins looming over you the whole time. Crawling through them gives you a sense of age and ruin that I really appreciate in my dungeons. The excellent music helps here too, many ruins having a foreboding soundscape punctuated by bursts of combat. Major villains tend to have some great theatrical effects, and many dungeons have various cool glowing seals and ancient implements to give them that fantasy mystery vibe. Combat is obviously important to look at, considering you'll be doing it very often. What they've done is another half-and-half system between MMOs and single-player action RPGs. You have a weapon with which you may smack things, and also 5 hotkey slots for equipping your various active skills, and 1 ultimate slot. Attacks do feel pretty responsive, but it'll never be quite the level of a single-player game, since we are on a server that has to process my attack. Attacks and skills are at least snappy to use, and the resulting impacts on enemies feel relatively good, if a bit delayed. I do think that only 5 slots for the number of skills we get is kind of too few, but there is a swap weapon button that you unlock later that gives you another set of 5 to use, so there's that. Ultimates charge up during combat and tend to have big flashy effects that make you look cool and feel powerful. You also have the ability to block and do a push thingy that can break you out of crowd control and interrupt enemies charging larger attacks. Many enemies have those attacks that put red shapes on the ground for you to dodge, mostly of the traditional 2 varieties, circles and cones, but elite enemies and bosses have more complicated mechanics than attacks to learn, many of them in that expected style that MMO bosses just tend to work. I do appreciate the extra combat complexity that bosses add to the mix, and I also like the fact that you'll face several that can do things like this during normal questing and not just in group dungeons. That way players get a taste of what the combat can become at higher levels before you make them form parties. New to the game in 2025 is a subclassing system that lets you pick an extra class to splash into. It's unlocked at level 50 and is something that adds further to that build variance I mentioned, although it's still possible there are certain combinations that are considered the meta for endgame content. I don't know for sure. I'm sure balancing something like that is probably a nightmare. I remember the sub-job system in Final Fantasy XI had all sorts of game-breaking combos people would go for until all of it got ironed out. One thing I should mention is the game has a sort of player welfare system in a few ways. One is that just by being online, you can redeem various packs of items that are on a daily timer. This means you often have some new shinies to pick up when you look. But another thing is that levels come with extra stuff pretty often. Levels can come with packs of consumables, choices between different kinds of crafting ingredient bundles, even permanent inventory expansions. Big milestone levels, like every 5, can even come with the choice of level-appropriate gear like new weapons. Gear, by the way, is something that's going to be an interesting one because gear in MMOs works differently than in single-player games like the Elder Scrolls series. For one, you can't just pick up everything you see, but enemies do have pretty fair drop rates. Gear comes in lots of different racial style varieties and also uses a colored rarity system like most MMOs. Items can be enchanted with various effects, just like in the main games. Some gear will even come pre-enchanted upon picking it up. You have to use filled soul gems to recharge them, just as you'd expect. One thing I noticed, this game has a big focus on set bonuses for gear. Almost every major piece of gear belongs to a set, and sets are generally 5 items large. The 2, 3, and 4 set bonuses are usually thematic and useful bonuses, but the 5th is hugely powerful and often unique to that set. The system encourages you to seek out and equip the various sets to keep yourself at maximum power for your level. Monetization is something I'm not really qualified to talk on too much, given I don't have 1,000+ hours in the game to really tell you all the pitfalls. I will say I noticed it seems to be mostly based on cosmetics and convenience. There are a few premium currencies you can get, and many of the things you can buy are cosmetic changes for your character, mounts, and even new skill effects. There are also scrolls that boost things like experience, there are dyes, there are themed crates that contain variations of different things related to the theme it's using. There are also other convenience things, the biggest of which for me being inventory slots. You do get a bigger inventory by leveling, but these are more extensive and much quicker to get, so it does seem like selling convenience is a major part of the in-game store. So my shallow verdict on the microtransactions is that they're very standard MMO fare with a focus on cosmetic stuff. Probably nothing game-breaking and advantageous being sold here, but certainly some stuff that'll make the experience go smoother for you. After my time with TESO, I was left with a good understanding of why it's a popular game in the genre. It does a lot of things right and crafts a fun experience to explore for players. It's possibly the only MMO I've tried where the player's insistence that it's good for solo play was actually 100% true with no caveats. Its systems are well thought out, its zones and quests are interesting, and it's easy to get that pleasant feeling of being lost in a huge world full of cool things for you to stumble across. I'd say if you're looking for a single-player experience, there's more than enough here to keep you busy for a long time, even without grouping with others. You have the exceptions that all MMOs have. Combat isn't quite as connected and satisfying as a solo game. Gear works on a slower scale than just looting a bandit's pants. And other players are walking around doing their own thing, which means you will be reminded that this is an MMO regularly. But if you can settle in and get comfy, I think you'll find a varied and rewarding experience with lots and lots to do. It helps that this game has had years of updates and refinements at this point, not to mention a very large number of content expansions. This means that in 2025, what you're getting into when you start playing is something refined and with years of content to sift through, including brand new campaigns and questlines like the new Wormcold stuff. The familiar feeling of Elder Scrolls lore is here, and it tends to surround you in cool historical examples, given that this takes place over 1,000 years before the main series of games. I hope this video was useful for people looking for an up-to-date analysis of the game, and I hope my time with it was enough to cover it with a good amount of competence. Personally, I think it's worth trying. It's cheap to get a hold of, the base experience, so just grabbing that and rolling up a character can help you decide later if you feel it's worth investing more into to get the current content passes. If you're looking for something like this, just giving it a shot will probably tell you without too much time investment if this is for you. I'll put the link to the main Steam page for TESO in the description below this video so that you can look at it and read about the almost 50 content updates it's gone through at this point. Thank you everyone for watching, and I'll see you next time.